We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! Here is the part 4 of What If Naruto Was an Elden Ring. I've found and fought my fair share of gods before. Never been a fan of them. They meddle and mangle everything. Who needs them? It's the strength of your spirit that matters, not them. I don't need any blessings, nor gods, or any of that. Go ahead. Shed no grace on me. I'll still fix this rotten world, one soul at a time. I'll save 'em all. Just you watch. Narutoxharem. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 9, Bend No Knee to Thee. Melina found breakfast a lively affair. Truth be told, it came as a surprise to the kindling maiden. After last night's disaster, everyone's exhaustion, and subsequent retreat to the roundtable hold, she'd expected it to be something of a dour affair. A sullen and somber repast with little in the way of words or camaraderie. It was not. Come morning, most of their merry little band had licked their wounds, not enough to be fit for combat, not yet, but enough to move. Those that couldn't were carried to the great table by Naruto's clones, whether they liked it or not. Once there all were greeted by a most startling sight. Come and get it. One of Naruto's clones banged a ladle against a cracked pot. We've got a bit of everything for ya. The weapons had been plucked free from its surface and set aside, making way for a grand banquet, all while that large shard of grace hovered above. Melina couldn't help but balk at the sight. She didn't even recognize some of those dishes. Here she spied a rasher of bacon, there bowls of porridge served with a side of eggs and some fruit besides, but that was where her admittedly limited expertise ended. There might have been a bit of mutton off to the side, and there were strange circular bits of what she assumed to be bread dripped in honey and syrup. She knew at once who was responsible for this. What she didn't know was when he did it. How could one man make such a feast in only a few hours? For all its bells and whistles, the roundtable hold was still a place where champions gathered. Champions had to eat. And eat they did. Once word spread, Tarnish descended upon the table en masse. Dee even deigned to join them, removing his helmet for the first time in her living memory. Quite pale he was. Handsome, too. Who would have thought? And there was Sorcerer Rogier, lively as ever, limping only a little now that his legs had been tended to. And there was shy little Roderica, breaking away from her spirit tuning long enough to fetch a plate for Master Hyuk. Theralina went with her, simple soul that she was. Others proved more lively. Greyroll descended upon the meat dishes with gusto, alas that brought her into conflict with Trish, the tree sentinel not at all keen on sharing. Millicent alone had yet to make an appearance, but she suspected the redhead would be roused soon enough by the ruckus. Truly, her Tarnished had a frightful penchant for attracting the most unlikely allies. Everyone tucked in, grateful for their meal. Those who weren't fond of such gatherings didn't linger over long. Corin and Diallos took their portions and departed to their own corners of the hold to feast in private. Some, like the all-knowing, didn't deign to show their faces at all, and thus it fell to the ever-silent Ensha to fetch food for him. She even glimpsed the warrior woman Nepheli for all of a moment. She snatched a plate and scurried away before anyone else could notice. But of Naruto himself, he was nowhere to be seen. Troubling. She could see his clones surely enough, flitting from one Tarnish to another as they served food, but the original wasn't among them. Her eye told her that much, and so she left the feast in search of him. The roundtable hold wasn't overly large, she was certain it would be an easy task. Indeed, it was imperative that she have words with him. She'd seen the pain in his eyes, muted, buried, but still present nonetheless. For better or worse, his failure with Radon had marked him. What manner of mar that would be remained to be seen. She would have to watch him carefully in the following days, lest he break. And if he does? Once more that little voice nagged at her as she glided through the corridors. She'd begun to fear that it, her conscience, would never let her be. What will you do then? Then she would find another. Liar. Nonsense. She cared not a jot for what happened to him. Liar, liar. No. She could not care. She could not afford to care. Liar, liar, liar. Your champion carries a great burden. I pray it does not break him. Melania scowled at the soft voice as much as the newcomer's approach. She'd been so fixated on the search that she hadn't sensed her arrival. Sure enough, when she craned her neck back, she found a familiar hooded visage gazing back at her, that fair face with green eyes downturned, wearing only a faint smile. Pfft, of course it would be Fia. She should have known that wily woman would try to get her claws into her tarnished. What manner of poison had she poured in his ear to make him act this way? No, focus. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her stress, no matter how tightly wound she was at the moment. His fate is not yours to know. She scowled at the deathbed companion. Leave him be. That is his choice to make. Her retort was gentle, but she sensed the steel in her words all the same. You cannot do so for him. Millicent yelped somewhere in one of the adjacent rooms. My lord, no. I can walk. Nope. Up you go. Wait. It's embarrassing. You don't need to carry me. Judging by the way her words trailed off into a squeak, the matter had been settled. Naruto was nothing if not stubborn. Still, for him to be so forward, an ugly thought dawned. What have you done to him? Fia leaned against a crumbling bookshelf, the very picture of decorum. You already know. Melina most assuredly did not. She only suspected Fia's misdeeds, and the appalling lack of certainty gnawed at her. Anger coiled in her heart, an ugly twisted root more grotesque than Godwin's ghastly form itself. She bit down on it with all her might, smothered the desire to strangle the woman before her, and comported herself once more. Only then did she dare speak. I would have it said, if you must. The damnable black-robed harlot smiled softly, a small secretive smirk of triumph that made Melina's blood blaze anew. I emboldened him. He came to me last night, at his wit's end, and I comforted him. As is my purpose. Must. Not. Kill. And what manner of comfort didst thou bequeath to him? I held him when he cried. Her words rang true, making Melina recoil. Cry? She didn't think he could cry. But the deathbed companion was still speaking, and with each word, so did her resolve falter. When he shouted, I listened. When he faltered, I set him upon the path once more. Those full lips pursed into a scowl. Would that you had done the same, he would not have come to me in the first place. Any fury Melina might have felt guttered out, taking the fire in her with it. Explain thyself. Are you truly so blind, dear girl? Fia stepped in. Laid a hand on her shoulder. Lips like ice brushed her ear, sending a succulent shiver shooting down her spine. How naive you are, how little you have done for him. She tried to pull away, but that cold grasp, those biting words, held her fast. Art thou not his maiden, Melina? Is it not thy purpose to aid him in all things? She scowled at her. I have aided him, have you, now? Those piercing green eyes pierced her lone orb. 'Twould not seem so. And what do you know? Melina's temper slipped its leash. Quick as a flash her hand flitted out, seizing the other woman's chin. While you hid away here, I have fought by his side in battle, and guided him on the path to being a lord. Fia didn't waver. And yet you do not know his heart as I do. The words were a blade in her herd. Her piece said. Fia released her and sashayed away. Melina watched her go, wishing nothing more than to drive a dagger through her back. Alas, the hold prevented such gratifying violence. Even if it didn't, she knew such an act would ruin everything. Damn. Damn her. Damn that deathbed companion to the darkest pit, because her words rang true. He should have come to her. Why didn't he? Had she not tried to assuage his guilt after the battle with Radon? She had. Had she not offered to turn his runes to strength time and time again, only to be rebuffed? Had she not spoken kind words to him, congratulated him on battles well fought? Had they not been honest with one another? She'd done all these things and more, and yet it was not her counsel he sought. Naruto often went his own way of his own will, and to hell with the consequences. The best she could do was aim him in a given direction. A seed of doubt planted itself in Melina's fractured heart. They had an accord, he and her, the two of them. Slowly, inexorably the seed took root. What if he cast her aside? Now it sprouted. Her vision tunneled, world darkening around the edges as her breath hitched in her throat. She caught herself on a wall to steady herself. He'd already heard Greyroll call her a kindling maiden. Did he suspect? Was that why he avoided her? He must never know her true purpose, for if he did, he would surely seek to stop her. It had to be this way. She mustn't get attached. She was meant to burn, and in doing so guide him unto destined death. If he learned what would become of her, he would usurp her purpose. The reason for her birth, her creation, the sole reason Mother had made her. To lose that, it would destroy her. Such a thought, she could not bear it, but what if it came to be? Her fingernails bit into the wall. Calm. Be calm. She spurred herself forward once more. After what felt like an eternity, she found Naruto in the kitchen. Pan in hand, he flipped a strange fluffy white-on-brown thing into the air. End over end it spun, yet he caught it with ease, hummed to himself, laid it out upon a plate. One of his many clones came quick to sweep it away to join the others, snatching up a bit of butter and pitcher of what smelled like syrup as it went. Or perhaps it was honey. In her frazzled state, she couldn't be sure. What is that? Pancakes. He grinned over his shoulder at her approach, bright as the sun. Wanna try one? Melina knew not what these pancakes were, but they smelled wonderful. Still, there was her dignity to consider. I have no need of food. Her stomach growled. She flushed. Naruto grinned. Come on. Quick as a flash, he carved off a decent bit of said pancake, stuck an iron fork into it, and offered the confection up unto her. Leaning back availed her not, he all but jabbed her lips with it. Her lone eye flitted down, eyeing it with mild trepidation. Part of her wanted to deny him. But he looked so proud. Refusing now would be like kicking a puppy. Very well. She opened her mouth and let him feed her. Well? He grinned as she chewed, swallowed now. How's it taste? Delicious. Her pride would never allow her to admit such, of course. Nay, she'd call it adequate and wonderful. Curses. Betrayed by her treacherous tongue again. Course correct. Now. I wasn't aware of your culinary skills. Great. Good to know I got a batch right. I screwed up so many times. She glimpsed it again, that sliver pain in his eyes as he spun away but dulled, distant as he returned to his tasks. He'd done well to keep himself distracted. Perhaps that was the true reason for this fantastic feast. He was busying himself with so many projects, the better to bury it. Far be it from her to tell him otherwise. Haven't really perfected this yet. His grin was almost sheepish as he rambled on. Fitting, given some of the fare he'd made. Clones found a bunch of old cookbooks back in Kaled. Read too. When they popped, I got their memories. I see. Melina really didn't, much less understand the concept of his clones, but far be it from her to ruin his good mood, and what was he doing? With neither word nor warning, he flitted sideways with vulpine grace and took her by the arm, tugging her away. A spreading flower of red bloomed across her face. Was she blushing? No. Nay. Never. In the end she let him lead her back to the table and guide her into a seat. He took the one beside her, grinning fit to burst. There you are. Greyroll grinned at him. Finally decided to join us, have you? Yup. He laughed as he slid into his eat. Sorry for being late. Everyone enjoying the food? A chorus of assents answered him. Millicent granted him a demure nod. Trish pumped a fist into the air. They were certainly a motley crew, all things considered. A man from another world, herself a kindling maiden, and a tree sentinel. One mustn't forget the dragonkin woman nor their resident redhead. Toss in that fulsome fop of a finger maiden alongside timid Roderica and a few others and they had the beginnings of a, is this what I think it is? Rogier laid his plate down with a rueful grin. Are we calling a war council? Greyroll bared her fangs his way. Silence, sorcerer. You're only sitting here at all because he took pity on you. Hey. Naruto raised both hands before things could escalate further. Calm down. We're all friends here. There's nothing wrong with helping someone if they're in pain. Rogier bobbed his head, setting his hat swaying. For which I'm quite grateful, friend. And here thought I'd never be able to walk again. I'm in your debt. Speakin' of which, Naruto pivoted in his seat, don't think I've forgotten about you over there, Trish. Sure enough, the tree sentinel wilted under his stoic glare. I haven't given up on giving you back your voice. I still want to know who messed you up like that. When she looked fit to protest again, he changed tack, clever boy that he was. You want me to fix up that arm of yours again while I'm at it, Millicent rubbed the stump of her arm thoughtfully, not meeting his gaze. Later, perhaps. Something wrong? Well, yes. She squirmed a little and hung her head in sullen shame. I'm considering leaving. On a journey. I've started to recall, however dimly, my destiny. Roger made an intrigued noise. And what destiny is that, my fair lady? In truth? Millicent peered into her porridge. I am not sure. It feels as if something's calling me to the north. Melina's gaze snapped toward, alarm crying out in her heart. Had she begun to remember her origins? That might prove problematic. How much more would Millicent yet remember in time? If allowed to go her own way unsupervised, she might well become a problem in the future, to say nothing of her sisters. Under no circumstances could they and Melina be allowed to meet. They would bloom and bloom and bloom again, rotting all in their path. It would be a disaster. Not alone, you're not. Naruto's response brought her no small amount of relief. We can talk about that once we've finished here. Their resident redhead perked up. My lord, he grinned. Ain't no way I'm letting you do this by yourself. Millicent's pale face flushed to the very roots of her hair. As you wish. D stood and tugged his helmet back on. My thanks for the meal, but I've no interest in a council. My path is my own. Fair enough. Naruto flicked a lazy wave his way. We'll be here if you change your mind. Good hunting. The hunter paused, then inclined his head. His gaze swiveled over then, alighting upon Trish. Melina thought she saw a spark of something there. Whatever the CAE, the silent sentinel granted him a grave nod of her own, and though she could not speak, some unseen message seemed to pass between the two warriors. To you as well. D said at last, and went his way. That's just the way he is. Roger's affable laugh wiped the tension away like a warm summer's breeze. Still chuckling, he rose from the table and snatched up his cane. Once again, many thanks for the feast. He gave a polite bow as best his recovering legs would allow, then turned as though to hobble after his friend. I'll go have a word with him, please, carry on without me in the meantime. Which reminds me. Naruto declared apropos of nothing, I want to break Hyuga out of his chains, soon. Thoughts? Millicent nodded her approval. Rod Erika nearly spat out her tea. Is that even possible? The poor spirit tuner sounded almost hopeful as she looked to him. He was cursed by Queen Marika herself. Melina knew he was going to try regardless. He had that look in his eye, the one that made the impossible quite possible. Sure enough, his fist thumped down on the table. Curse or not, it ain't right. I think you might be able to help. Rod Erika sputtered. Me? I'm just a spirit tuner, not even a very good one. Nonsense. You're great. Well, we do have 2 great runes. Theralina finally found enough courage to interject. Perhaps we could go to the capital right now and seek an audience with Queen Marika. No. Naruto all but bit off the word, plunging the room into silence. No? Theralina flinched, doe-like eyes gone wide. My lord? Why ever not? Melina's spirit sank all the way down to her ankles. Whatever was he up to now? Not yet, at any rate. He wiped his mouth with a bit of silk cloth, polished off his drink, and leaned back in his chair. His posture rather reminded Melina of someone she'd seen before, and the memory pricked her most painfully indeed. I want to help people, but Khaled was an eye-opener for me. We can't go in blind like that again. His gaze swept over each of them in turn. I don't want to see any of you get hurt. Millicent perked up. Greyroll and Trish looked away. Melina felt a curious pang in her heart. She tried to ignore it. Was it truly that bad? Rod Erika inquired. I know the demigods are terrifying. Still, their finger maiden tried to rally. But to become Elden Lord, you must seek the Erd Tree, and I will. Naruto reassured her. When I'm good and ready. He looked away, scratching his cheek. Okay, and when will that be? Melina cursed herself even as she spoke. Gods above, was she really siding with her? Of all people? This is not something you can put off forever. This world is in dire need of repair, and, he enunciated slowly, making his point clear, I'm gonna do my best to fix it. You have my word. Trust me. I don't think we should rush this. Absently, he began to rub the rune ring on his finger, massaging the glowing trinket in careful strokes. I think something awful might happen if we do. We gotta be careful, you know. Melina stilled. He knew. Or suspected something, at the very least. Still, his words seemed to be enough for Trish and Greyroll. Neither protested. Millicent and Roderica merely nodded. Theralina looked fit to argue, then demurred with a pained nod. As you command, my lord. Then I suggest we return to Limgrave. Greyroll put in. I have a child there in need of discipline. Another in Liurnia of the Lakes, as well. They would make for powerful allies. Wait, I thought you said you were leaving once we dealt with Radon? She made an amused noise. I've decided to extend my stay. Naruto perked up. Sure, don't see why not. They all agreed, one by one. Not a single one of them took her side. It was too much. Melina couldn't bear the way they looked at him, even now. No, this was more than that. If he didn't go to the capital, if he did not seek the Erd Tree, then things would remain as they were. If things remained as they were, she could not obtain the rolled medallion, without which she wouldn't be able to guide him to the Forbidden Lands, and if they did not go there, then the Erd Tree would not burn. It had to burn. It must burn. Her sealed eye began to twitch anew. She settled her hand on his. May I have a word? She'd not thought to find him here. There it was, the bitter truth. Nepheli hated it. She'd fled from Naruto in shame, run from her weakness and the look in his eyes, like a scared little girl. Father had chided her for it, even as she relayed news of Godric's death. Conduct unbefitting of the Round Table, he'd called it. He'd been right. Her will had faltered, she'd been granted a glimpse of her own death and fled from it as a craven would from the battlefield. And now she'd stumbled upon him here. He'd changed in her absence. Nepheli could see it in his eyes, that fire was still there but it was tempered now. Banked by loss. It didn't take much to see why. She recognized the second great rune carved into his arm, burning like wildfire. He and his companions had faced General Radon. They'd not come out unscathed either. There were new faces at the table, a woman with draconic features, a wounded redhead, and a bashful young woman clad in the robes of a finger maiden. She had no right to approach him again. Even now, hurting as he was, that was a right she must earn, a pride to reclaim. She could only watch him from afar. Watch as his maiden laid a hand on his, leaned in, and whispered something in his ear. She forced herself to be still, to observe now, as the pair made their excuses and departed for a smaller room. Her mind conjured forth wild images of what they might be up to, and unbidden, she found herself stepping forward. She caught herself a heartbeat later. Until their paths crossed again. Until she redeemed herself. Until then. Naruto knew a storm when he saw one. And the look in Melina's eyes? Stormy as they came. He let her drag him to an empty room. Allowed her to shut the door shut behind her. She didn't bother to lock it, because the moment those doors closed, she leaned against them. One hand fisted roughly against the wood, and she almost seemed to lean against it for strength. Her head kissed the worn wood with a sigh. What art thou doing, tarnished? He didn't like her tone, liked even less that he couldn't see her face, that she wouldn't look at him. Is this about Theralina? No response. Not even a twitch. Could you stop sulking? She needed a place to belong. How kind. Melina rounded on him, eerily calm as she looked up at him. And how many more misfits will you take in before this is done, Her visible eye blazed a bright, molten gold. How many do you intend to bring to the Round Table? Still her voice did not waver. Well? I would have your answer. As many as it takes to fix this world. Naruto palmed his face and exhaled in a sullen sigh when she didn't bite. You're going to be difficult about this, aren't you? Difficult? He knew it was the wrong thing to say, because the moment he did, the kindling maiden stomped on his foot and seethed up at him. Considering you've taken a second maiden into your service? Yes, I think I'm going to be difficult about this. Why do you even care? Melina hissed out an angry breath. You dare? Damn straight I do. He buelled forward to tower over her. I respect ya, and I value your input, but you've been pissy ever since Theralina joined us. What's your problem? She bridled. You took another maiden. No, he shook his head, sensing the lie. Nice try, but I'm not buying it. There's more to this than that. Is it because I won't go to the capital yet? Her emotions blazed. He couldn't make sense of them, much less discern her answer. Yes? No? Maybe so. He risked a glance over her shoulder and spied Radon's specter in the shadows. The dead demigod stared back and spoke again. He still couldn't hear the words. No, no, no. He was not seeing that. Another thought struck him, then. Frantic for a distraction, he seized on it. Earlier, Greyroll called you a kindling maiden. What does that mean? Her jaw snapped shut, and with it, his anger began to boil anew. So secretive, this one. He hated secrets. Not gonna tell me. Fine. I'll do this my way. He thumped a fist against his chest. I won't let anyone else die. So don't worry, just as you didn't let Radon die. Her words tore open the wound in his heart. Naruto's gaze snapped into scarlet slits. Beneath that smoldering stare, Melina flinched. He could see that she regretted what she'd said, but it didn't change the fact that she'd said it in the first place. She'd wanted to hurt him for a moment, and she had. Even now she tensed, expecting an outburst. He wanted to give her one. To rant and rave and rage at her, as he'd had to defy a. No. I'm better than that. He closed his eyes. Inhaled. Exhaled now, breathing out his anger with it. When next they opened, those smoldering scarlet orbs were blue once more. Melina didn't budge an inch. So stubborn. Even scared out of her wits, she was just so damn determined. He didn't blame her. He was much the same. He stood his ground. So did she. Something had to give. Eventually, one of them did. Had to happen, sooner or later. Rely on me more. Melina whispered suddenly, startling him. Confide in me. Let me share your burdens. Her head snapped up. He glimpsed a flash of tears. Melina, wait a sec. She most certainly did not. She growled, shoved him against the wall and stepped in, blocking his body with hers. Scarred hands reached up, grabbed him by the face, and yanked his lips down to hers. It was not a gentle kiss by any means of measure, an act born of equal parts frustration and misery on her part. Their teeth jarred together with a harsh click and he felt something sink into his lip. Pain sparked and he grunted in surprise. MMPH. It lasted all of an instant, then the kindling maiden jerked back, face red, chest heaving, lone eye glaring great golden daggers at him. Her mouth worked wordlessly, trying and failing to form proper words. She looked horrified, as though she couldn't believe what she'd just done. That made two of them. He couldn't believe it either. Who would have thought that fiery, feisty woman was capable of such? Look what you've made me do. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as a hoarse sob. You've ruined everything. Reflexively, his hands tightened around her waist in a vain attempt to comfort her. It spooked Melina instead. She dissolved in his arms, vanishing into so much blue dust before he could so much as utter a word. That dust hurtled through the cracked door, leaving him with his thoughts and the shock that followed. Well, that happened. Naruto touched a finger to his mouth. Winced, as it came away bloody. He blinked slowly, still not quite comprehending. How could he? Kurama had gone quite silent, as such he was left to stew in his own thoughts. They weren't unpleasant ones. Did she really think he'd been ignore her? Was that why she wanted him to rely on her more? He hadn't meant to ignore her at all. Someone eased through the door, pushing it open. Greyroll slipped in. I'm not interrupting, am I? Not anymore. No, he muttered, still dazed. You're good. She looked about. And your maiden? Where is she? Probably hiding from him. She ran off already. Her smile worried him. Did she now? Oi? He scowled, trying to quell the sudden flutter in his stomach. What's that look for? Nothing. Said smile became a smug smirk. If she wishes to throw a tantrum and flee like a child, then I care not a jot. She stepped to him and idly, he noticed her tail. Unlike her wings folded neatly against her back, it almost seemed to be swaying in thinly veiled glee. Almost made him think of a dog. He didn't dare utter the words aloud. Thankfully he didn't have to, for her words filled the silence between them. Dragons prize strength above all else. Another step now, her fail flicking out to slam the door shut behind her. Strength of character, strength of arms, strength of spirit. You've shown me all this and more. If she cannot see such, or rather, if she refused to, then 'tis her loss. Is this going somewhere? It is. Greyroll stepped into him fully, linked both arms behind his neck, and pressed her forehead to his. Mate with me. Now. Naruto's jaw clicked open with an audible pop. One word came to mind. Whoa. Chapter 10, Here Be Dragons. This is where you began your journey, more or less. Naruto raised a hand to shade his eyes against the setting sun of Limgrave. Feels like a lifetime ago, now. Longer still, for me. Millicent hummed softly to herself, wide eyes drinking in the sprawling countryside before them. I had not thought to see such beauty again in my lifetime. Her golden eyes almost seemed to spark in the low light as she gripped the stump of her right arm, gazing out into the lake beyond. It's magnificent. He couldn't quite hide the chuckle that followed. You get used to it. I should hope not, my lord. A small, fragile smile touched her pale face as she turned to face him. The day such beauty no longer stirs me will truly be the day I die. Heat speared through Naruto's face, sharper than any slap. It wasn't so much Millicent's words as the way she looked in that moment. The light of the sinking sun caught her unbound scarlet hair and set it afire in the low light, creating a fiery red halo around her head as she smiled. She'd never been more alive. Thank you, that smile deepened, dimpling her cheeks. For showing me this place. I will remember this moment, always. And yet for all her brave words, he could still sense the tangled knot of emotions deep within her. So much stress. So much anxiety. So much fear. She longed for the return of her other arm but dreaded losing it again, wondered how much time she had left before the rot returned, before her body began to degrade once more. Would the rot take this moment from her too, as it had taken everything else? Unbidden, he found himself silently reaching for her hand. His fingers brushed hers and his sworn sword jolted in surprise. Credit where it was due, she recovered with admirable speed. Fingers gripping his, she raised their interlocked hands and pressed them to her forehead. The gesture seemed to strengthen her, if only because he felt her emotions calm. She closed her eyes with a sigh, exhaling her fears with it. My lord. Greyroll winged down behind them, and the moment died an ugly death. No sign of Agheel. She gave herself a mighty shake, wings folding against her back as her tail swayed side to side. 'Twould seem my wayward child is most adept at hiding tonight. Those lively golden eyes narrowed upon seeing their interlocked hands. A faint smile played across her pale visage. Well, well, thou art a bold one indeed to seek that which would be mine. Millicent tugged her hand from his, breaking the spell completely. That was a rather short flight, Lady Dragon, perhaps. Greyroll granted them a toothy grin. I would have continued yet longer, but I didn't wish to frighten the little mouse any more than I already had. I fear he's reached his limit. She lowered her arms and a tiny form scampered out of her grasp, clutching at the ground for dear life. After all he did so dearly wish to fly. Never again, I feel sick. Naruto's gaze was drawn to the smallest member of their merry band. You alright there, BOC? Looking a little pale, there. J just fine, lord. The demi-human stumbled out, looking positively green. I think I'll lay here for a while, He gasped a little when Millicent knelt beside him and began to stroke his back in slow, tender circles. Many thanks, my lady, that helps. Greyroll grinned. You did well to survive your first flight, little mouse. I might make a dragon of thee yet, the poor lad whimpered. No thank you, ma'am. They'd stumbled upon the friendly little seamster some hours ago, a demi-human cursed into tree, of all things. Friendly little fellow. He'd been friendlier still since they'd found and fetched his sewing kit from that wretched cave. Many a skull had been cracked there. Still he remained remarkably pure despite the hardships he'd suffered, and that was a rare quality in the lands between. Such a precious being deserved protection. Greyroll had taken a liking to him. Wait, a thought occurred to him just then. Wasn't Theralina with you? Pretty sure you were carrying her, too. Greyroll looked away a little too quickly. The stubborn girl wished to investigate the lake. Something about retrieving runes for you. His brow furrowed. You didn't drop her, did you? She looked the other way. Not at all. Grey, I didn't. She huffed beneath his stoic stare, a rare flicker of flame escaping her lips in thinly veiled agitation. "'Tis no fault of mine if the foolish girl wishes to prove her worth. She promised to return by sundown. Send one of your clones if you worry for her so. Or would you rather I order Xyx after her?" "No. Leave him be." Xyx the Purified, the young seemed to enjoy his new title, was resting back in Caelid with Jaren and the rest of the Redmane Knights. As much as they might have enjoyed a leisurely ride on the Wyrm's back, he needed his rest. Greyroll could always call him if need be. Still, he clapped a hand to his forehead. "I told that silly girl I didn't need the runes. Honestly, she'd been acting strange ever since he refused to go to the capital." He wasn't certain why. Was she angry with him? Did she want to prove herself while Melina hid away? It could have been any number of things, really, but he didn't think her the treacherous sort. He could sense her emotions only a league away, a dutiful presence filled with dogged determination. A frown creased his face. Theralina really did want to help, but this was dangerous, certainly for one with her limited skill set. "We could use those runes," he scoffed. "Why? We're strong enough already," says the man who grafted 2 great runes onto his body. "How many more do you plan to claim? 2? 3? 4? 5? Fair enough. Fine." If Theralina she really wanted to help that badly, he wouldn't deny her. "Begging your pardon, M-Lord?" Boc's voice plucked at his ear before he could dwell on it. "But why are we here?" When he didn't answer right away, the little demi-human cowered. "I'm sorry, I know it's not my place to ask such things." He saw no reason to lie. "Huntin' dragons. Don't suppose you saw any before we found you, DD dragons?" The poor seamster squeaked. "The large kind," Greyroll grinned. "Smaller than me, but larger than thee." Millicent shot her a scathing look. "Don't be crass, Paw. You coddle the little mouse, let him be." Naruto let his thoughts turn inward as the duo squabbled. As per Greyroll's request, they'd come back to Limgrave. In search of dragons. Fire Dragon Agheel and Glintstone Dragon Smerig, to be precise. Supposedly the former was hiding somewhere around the lakes, while the latter lurked in Liurnia, the next stop on their grand journey. One that seemed more and more likely, given that Agheel hadn't shown himself all day. That said, it felt strange returning to Limgrave after all this time. As if he'd taken 3 steps forward, then a step back, that sort of thing, you know? He didn't much like at least of all the way nearly every enemy fled before him. In their lord's absence, the soldiers of Godric were all but routed, most fled at the sight of him, the few knights who put up a fight were summarily trounced by his companions. He suspected he had the oaf's great rune to thank for that, even now it pulsed in his chest, a steady beat to match the heat hammering from his right arm. Radon's rune still burned there, a pleasant cherry red that kept the coming chill of the night from creeping into his bones. The last time he'd been here, he'd had an entirely different party at his back. Trish had been with him then, now she was convalescing from the last of her wounds back in the round table. Melina meanwhile remained hidden in her astral form, refusing to show her face after their last spat, and the fierce kiss she'd given him. Roderica was off learning what it meant to be a spirit tuner from Hugh, likewise, he was loath to interrupt her lessons. Nepheli, well, Sage knew where she'd run off to after they'd dealt with Godric. He had a feeling they'd meet again soon. In their place he found himself accompanied by others, by Millicent, Theralina, and Greyroll, the latter of whom was even now giving him a sidelong glance when she thought he wasn't looking. Oh, was she looking? Naruto blew out a sigh and kept his eyes firmly facing forward, refusing to give the dragoness the satisfaction she sought. If he looked at her now, she'd make it her mission to nail him to the wall again, and he just might let her in his current mood. Though he'd managed to fend her off back in the hold, she'd made it clear that she wouldn't be denied for long. Sooner or later, he would have to choose. This was new for him. Choosing, and the attention. He wasn't used to folk being interested in him, not like that. Millicent had been the first to express any real interest, he wasn't right sure about Melina, and now he had a bloody dragon after him. To say nothing of any other entanglements that might arise in the future. Whatever was a shinobi to do, answer them. Clear the air. How? He flailed mentally at Kurama. I think the world of M. I don't want to hurt anyone. Really, he didn't. Millicent had struck him from the first he'd saved her life, she'd sworn herself to his service in return and repaid the favor thrice over since. No doubt she would keep repaying it, despite any objections he raised for her sake. Until she found her way. Until the rot was cleansed from her once and for all. By contrast, Melina was a fly at one, her motives her own. Still, she'd given him good guidance, even if he hadn't listened to half of it. He wanted to understand her. Make things right with her, and ferret out the secret she clung to so desperately. He knew she was hiding something from him, something terrible, but he feared prying might well break her in two. Greyroll, well. She was another beast. He'd thought he understood her initially, that he had the measure of the stubborn dragoness who initially refused to so much as give him the time of day. Not at all, he'd gone and impressed her, and now she seemed determined to have him one way or another. Roderica, Nepheli, the list went on without end. He cared about them dearly, each had helped him on his journey in their own way. Even Theralina, new to their party though she was, had wriggled her way into his heart before he realized it, this lost little soul searching for belonging in a world gone mad. All of them, each unique in their own ways, each holding a piece of his heart. The idea of choosing a paramour from among the ladies threatened to break him, in part because he knew little of love himself. You're telling me to choose one over the other, his throat clogged at the thought. I can't, oi. I never said you had to choose one. A thunderbolt of realization struck. Oh, how would that even work? I don't know the first thing about romance. Let alone but you are interested. If not, you would have rebuffed Greyroll much more harshly back at the hold. He was. It was flattering to actually have someone think of him like that, even if he didn't know how to properly respond yet. There was a part of him that longed to, a dark instinct that Millicent had inadvertently awoken with her first kiss. It had grown louder after Fia embraced him the second time. Howled at him when a furious Melina kissed him hard enough to draw blood. Even now, it gnawed at him, one urging him to just give in and partake. He didn't know what to do with it. So he'd shoved into a box in the back of his head, for now. Then learn. Kurama gave him a hard, mental jab. Unless you want to go around breaking hearts with that thick head of yours. Hey, he winced, wounded by the words. I'm not that dense, am I? You really are. Try keeping an open mind going forward. You might be surprised. And so it was with cheeks aflush that he had their small band make camp for the night on a hill overlooking the lake. It wasn't that difficult, even with one arm. Millicent was skilled and she had both Boc and him to help her erect the tents. Greyroll even deigned to both make a and light fire pit, thereby saving Naruto the exasperating and somewhat humiliating task of using flint and tinder. A brace of rabbits were summarily caught and left to roast over the fire in short order with a bit of roe of fruit, leaving them to warm themselves by the open flame. Are you alright, my lord? The world snapped back and Naruto forced himself to focus. Greyroll was gnawing happily on a half-cooked rabbit, while Boc was busy mending his coat. But Millicent, she was looking right at him. He tugged at his collar, remembering the marks Greyroll had left there as her eyes slid his way. More or less. Just thinking. Still he felt her keen eyes on him, rather the tiny discolored bruises on his neck. Did someone attack you? No doubt it looked as though some ferocious beast had mauled his throat. Guess you could say that. Indeed. Greyroll sashayed past, eyes gleaming in the gloom. Hummed a laugh ahead of them. There was a great deal of attacking, little mouse. Quite a bit indeed, before he'd managed to pry her away. Millicent tilted her head. Blinked. Comprehension dawned in her eyes and her face flamed to match her hair. Oh! Anger sparked in his chest. Hey! Don't call her a mouse. She ain't one. You're right. My apologies. She dipped her head, surprising him with her diffidence. A mere mouse could not hope to do battle with Radon and survive. Little bud, then. A knowing smile touched her full lips when she raised her head again. She is yet to bloom, after all. Millicent clutched the stump of her arm with a shiver. He wished she'd let him restore it. Yes, of course. She muttered softly to herself. You're much stronger than I, a far more capable ally than a mere cripple. Why would he want anything to do with one such as me? Hey! I never said. What foolishness is this? You admit defeat so easily. He half expected Greyroll to laugh, revel in her victory. Her scowl caught him unawares instead, as did the words that followed. I thought you intended to make him your mate. A hand flicked down, catching her by the chin. Would you surrender him to me over a few words? She gave her a hard shake. Where is the strength you showed against Radon? Well? If you want him, then fight for him. Claim him. Millicent squeaked, eyes flicking to and fro in search of an escape. That's not. Naruto burst to his feet, not at all liking where this was going. That's enough. Let her go. She rounded on him, still gripping Millicent's face. You would defend such weakness? I thought better of you. There's nothing weak in what she's doing. He snared her by the wrist, forcing her arm back. Now, stop. You're hurting her. Bah! Greyroll complied with a scoff, face carved from stone. You understand nothing. Neither of you. Call me when you've made up your minds, and found your spines. Her wings lashed at the ground, buffeting them with a windstorm as she took wing, rocketing into the clouds. Millicent glared after her rapidly retreating form, massaging her aching chin. When the Mother of Dragons didn't return after a minute, she dared to speak at last. Whatever came over her, she wasn't trying to insult ya, you know. Naruto plunked back down beside her. I'm sure of it. Her eyes sought his. Then what did she mean? Look, dragons go for strength. He raised his hands to fend off her anger, but it never came. Seems I went and proved myself to her without realizing it. She's been after me ever since. She hates doubt and weakness as much as anything. I think, his face began to burn as he looked away, she was expecting you to challenge her. When you didn't, that pissed her off. Oh. Another blink. Yes, well. That makes proper sense now, doesn't it? He could just imagine her thoughts now. Her lord was strong. In her eyes there could be no one stronger. Greyroll was right to recognize such. To respect. The rattled redhead frowned. Yet clearly she cares for you. Guess she does. He blew out a sigh. She's just got a weird way of showing it. Must be a dragon thing. Maybe she was the outlier. Her hand cupped his cheek. I care for you as well, my lord. I would not see you come to harm. She leaned into him, seeking warmth from the cold. He let her. Felt kinda nice. Was it really so wrong to enjoy it? I'm not gonna run away from this. He spoke into the silence, staring into the crackling flames. I just don't know how to deal with it. Millicent laid her head against his chest. He was sure she heard it skip a beat. You are my lord. I am your blade, you sword. Do with me what you will. His temper slipped its leash. He choked it to death. Don't talk like that. You're not a sword. But I am. Her ardent words stilled him, as much as the devotion behind them. You misunderstand. I knew nothing before you came into my life. She dared to reach up and grip his shoulder with her good hand. All of my memories were gone, eaten away by the rot. Now they have begun to return, and whenever I close my eyes I find you there. At the center. You are always in my thoughts. His heart kicked against his chest. Golden eyes flicked up to meet his, half-lidded with desire. Allow me to express that once more, and please forgive my presumptuousness again. Millicent leaned up from where she laid against him, pivoted, and delivered a chaste kiss to his lips. It was a brief, fleeting thing, even then it nearly burned his world white. She pulled away, eyes holding a frail, tentative warmth. When he didn't immediately respond, she touched his face and kissed him yet again, stronger this time, lips lingering over his own, bringing with it the faint scent of her. She smelled of wildflowers and cherries, and there beneath it all, a faint, sickly sweet smell. It was too much. Naruto's control slipped and his arms committed bloody mutiny. He found himself looping an arm around her waist to draw her into a crushing kiss. She noticed at once, made a pleased noise, and pressed herself against him, all but sitting in his lap. By the sage, she was soft. Warm, too. He wanted to hold her forever. He held her for what felt like an eternity, until finally, he had to break for air. Mercifully, Millicent didn't test his limits a fourth time. Earlier, you said you would aid me. She shifted against him, head to chest, facing the fire. Would you hold to your words, even now? I must go north. She said after a long moment. I feel as though something is calling me there. Someone perhaps, or wait. She looked past the flames. Frowned. What's that? I see a light. Naruto turned to follow her gaze. Frowned. There was a burning beacon out on the lake. It hadn't been lit before. Someone was running away from it, waving their arms frantically, shouting. He recognized the pale robes at a glance. Theralina, gone! She cried out, tripped, and clambered upright, running for her life. She's shouting something. He sat up, not quite comprehending why she was running, much. What in the world? Dragon! Realization dawned. Bugger! As though summoned by those very words, Greyroll came crashing back down. She struck the earth a yard away with neither word nor warning, bloodied from head to toe and gasping for air. One of her wings had been torn clean off, but it was growing back even as he looked on. Much to his chagrin, she tilted her head towards the night sky, slitted eyes sliding shut. He heard her inhale deeply, and then, she screamed, a low, ululating sound that rang through the night. Something screamed back. A distant dark shape came crashing through the clouds and arrowed toward the beacon Theralina fled from. The poor souls worshipping it never stood a chance. One moment were still gazing toward the sky, arms raised in supplication, utterly unaware of the doom hurtling their way. They continued to pray, until their very last moment. In the next, they were so much red mist. This new dragon was a fair sight larger than young Ixike's. Healthier, too, with none of the wicked rot that had plagued his lesser kin. Not as large as Greyroll's natural state or Kurama, but in a different league all the same. Dark russet scales glimmered in the dying light of the beacon as he craned back his neck and stood on his hind legs. He looked to and fro, searching for his prey. A deep voice boomed with fiery thunder. Show yourself. Each word was an explosion, leaving their ears ringing. Who dares challenge Agheel? I dare. His head snapped toward them. Naruto swore softly. You have forgotten yourself. Greyroll started down the rise, eyes blazing. How far you have fallen, that you would strike your own mother. I have done no such thing. The fire dragon snorted and moved to meet her, expelling a thin plume of steam with every step. My mother rots in the Kaled wilds. Greyroll absolutely hissed. You ungrateful little. If I could transform, you would see the error of your ways. Naruto edged forward, grabbed her by the shoulder, and hauled her back. Let me try. A giant pupil fixated upon him. Brave little mouse. But bravery means naught to me. I will bend no knee to thee, not a skin Gyatu. His mouth curled in a small smile. This only ends one way, the beast scoffed. With your charred corpse in my jaws? Nope. He inhaled deeply, pulling natural energy from the air, letting his eyes blaze gold. With you on my side. So why don't we skip the brawl and just talk this out like? A wing slammed forward at his head. He caught it and slapped it back, sending the fire Wyrm reeling. Agheel jolt back, snorting harshly. What manner of sorcery is this? No sorcery here. Tell you what. He crossed both arms across his armored chest. I won't even use Kurama for this. Just my hands and... His gaze swept over his companions and settled on Theralina, who'd circled around to join them at last. She wanted a chance to prove herself. Alright, her spells. Credit where it was due, the maiden reacted quickly and scrambled to his side. One hand touched his back, fingers splayed, with the other raised, she whispered a rapid incantation. A golden sigil bloomed over their heads as she took one hand away and thrust it into the air. The moment she did, he felt the ache leave his bones, his mental exhaustion siphoned away and replaced with raw vigor. She didn't stop there. Another spell went up, bringing with it a startling surge of strength. No, not a spell, he realized. Something was flowing into him from her palm, kissing his back to lance through his body. A gentle sort of warmth enfolded him and he felt his eyes widen. Godric and Radon's runes burned ever brighter on his body, baffling him yet further. Agheel snorted, but made no move to intervene, proud dragon that he was. Theralina took the opportunity to lean closer, all but pressing herself against his back. Does this please you, my lord? What the hell are you doing? She smiled tentatively. Merely turning your runes to strength. It was then that Naruto finally understood. He'd collected thousands of runes during his journey thus, not knowing how to use them. Not caring to. Theralina wasn't able to reach them all, fledgling maiden that she was, but she found enough, and those that she touched ignited, burning in his blood. It felt wonderful. Strength surged through him, adding to his already expansive prowess. Could Melina do this? Why hadn't she? He felt like he could leap into the clouds, vault mountains, tear down the moon itself. Agheel scoffed, wholly unaware of what had just transpired. A little mouse and his maiden. Hardly a worthy meal of one such as I. Well, I am fighting a mighty dragon after all, Naruto grinned, appealing to the Wyrm's pride. I need all the help I can get. Boc blinked. But Lord, can't you just... Greyroll clamped a hand over the demihuman's mouth and hid a laugh behind her palm with the other. Millicent looked on with a rare smile. Sure enough, the sarcasm went right over Agheel's horned head. Very well, then. To battle! Naruto planted his feet and beckoned. You first. The dragon lunged. This was madness. Melina nearly burst from cover when Agheel lunged, nearly leaped forward and shoved Naruto aside from those gaping jaws. Fear and self-loathing that held her back kept her hidden in astral form for a second too long, a moment too late, a sliver of eternity that seemed to stretch on, dragging on to eternity. She saw that mighty maw open wide, ready to bite. Bad enough that fledgling maiden turned some of his runes to strength, her task, and no others, thus leaving her feeling even more inadequate than before, but now this? Dodge, she hissed at him, willing him to move, to do something, anything at all. Move aside. Naruto did no such thing. Instead he turned, looking at her. Right at her. He just smiled. Then that fanged maw closed around her tarnished and he vanished from view as those great gaping jaws caught him. Agheel's body plowed forward to kick up a mighty cloud of dust, a mighty impact that threw Theralina to safety even as her tarnished was swallowed whole. Melina's heart leaped into her throat and she choked off a sob. That was it. He was dead, then. All her work and sorrow for nothing. Why wasn't there any blood? All at once the smoke cleared, defying her expectation. Naruto stood fast within, holding the dragon's jaws apart with his bare hands. He looked up, strengthened his stance, and took a step forward. My turn. With a roar he reared up, gripping the dragon by its head, lifted him clear off the ground with naught but his bare hands, and brought him crashing down. Agheel howled his rage and bathed him in napalm in recompense for his temerity. Too little, too late. The blonde took it head on, still shimmering in the odd aura Theralina had given him. His mouth twisted in a wide, toothy grin. Is that all? Agheel's tail whipped out over his head, seeking to smash his prey down while he stood still. Rather than retreat, the whiskered warrior released the beast's jaws and opened his arms wide. The towering tail that was once meant to smite him found itself caught instead, held tight against his chest. Agheel had all of a mere moment to realize his folly, then he found himself yanked backward and spun about. Once, twice, thrice, now. On the third revolution Naruto finally let go and flung him away into the air. Greyroll's kin howled in surprise as he righted himself in the air. Flame flickered behind his jaws. You dare! He was still howling when Naruto appeared on his back. Alighting between the Wyrm's shoulders, he raised an arm high. A keening azure sphere hissed in his open palm. With each passing moment it grew larger, casting the dragon in its shadow. Agheel saw it and bellowed his rage, trying to roll, to no avail. The blonde held tight, feeding more and more power to the snarling spiraling with each moment. Dishonorable human. You said you wouldn't use any spells. Wrong! Came the answering cry. I said I'd only use my hands. With a laugh, Naruto brought it crashing down and so too did the dragon crumple to the ground. Agheel did not have a good time after that, Melina found. He had a very bad time indeed. Chapter 11, Long Live the Queens. See? I told you we'd be friends. Please, forgive my rudeness. Nothing to forgive. Naruto couldn't help but preen a little when he said that. Why wouldn't he? Victory was his. A thoroughly beaten and bruised Agheel limped after their party, head bowed in defeat. He knew he'd been beat. All well and good in his book, he wasn't willing to take another life if he could avoid it, and the surly had put up quite the fight near the end. Would have been a shame to put him down after all that, you know. Would have broke Greyroll's heart too. Also something to be avoided. Now if she would just stop smirking like the cat that caught the canary. Have you learned your lesson now, my son? Sure enough, Grey couldn't resist ribbing her progeny. If you wish to go another round with my mate, I would not protest. Boc tilted his head. Mate, Millicent and Theralina bridled in unison. Naruto rolled his eyes. Here we go again. Mate? Agheel all but thundered. With a human, why ever not? Although he couldn't see her from this angle, Naruto just knew her smile was nothing short of sly. Mine current form is human where it counts. Don't read into it. Rather than rise to the bait, he clasped both hands behind his head and kept walking. She hasn't sealed the deal yet, no matter what she might say. Greyroll huffed. So cold. Still, that's what I like about thee. He rolled his eyes anew and kept walking. You alright there? Kurama sensed his mood at once. That's a bit cold, even for you. No, he wasn't alright. Not at all. He could feel someone watching them. Stalking them. An unseen presence just out of sight, but not out of mind. It wasn't Melina. She must have sensed it as well in her astral form, because he could feel her floating close to his shoulder, closer than she had been when Agheel attacked. He couldn't even determine its intent. It didn't feel hostile or malevolent quite yet, just curious. But curiosity wasn't always a good thing now, was it? The rune on his finger hummed. Be wary, don't gotta tell me twice. In the end their voyeur didn't show, and thankfully, it didn't take much to convince Agheel to follow them deeper into the lands between, his kind respected strength after all, and he'd shown his own in spades. He wasn't quite sure what he intended to do with all these dragons he seemed to be collecting, but surely something would come to him, sooner or later. He'd figure something out after they rounded up Smerag and sacked the academy. At least Liurnia of the Lakes lived up to its name. Once a lovely valley, it had long since flooded during the shattering. Its prosperous gate town was now little more than a sunken ruin haunted by monsters and shades, and it was into this hell that their ragtag little band descended. Hard to believe this place had once been a splendid place of commerce, a place where people came from far and wide to learn the secrets of magic. It is our history, my lord. Millicent really knew her stuff, it seemed. When asked as much she'd flushed only a little under his gaze. We must endeavor to remember it. If not us, then who? Under his bemused stare, her pale face had turned a pretty shade of pink. Forgive me. I wanted to be of use to you. I've also done a fair bit of reading in the roundtable hold on the subject. And didn't he just hate that place? He disliked the idea of leaving a recovering Trish anywhere near Gideon. Guy gave him bad vibes, but that pesky pact on the hold prevented him from inflicting any sort of harm upon the so-called all-knowing. He'd have to trust in his friends and Rogier to see her safe until he returned. And he would be, just as soon as they concluded their business here. And there was still much work to do, both within their group and without. That's putting it mildly. You've attracted quite the eclectic band of rogues, haven't you? He cast a quick glance back at the others. Greyroll had chosen to ride atop Agheel's head when he wasn't looking. Now the former conversed with Millicent and a fretful BOC. The latter was trying to look anywhere but at the great beast, a fact that both dragons seemed to find infinitely amusing. But where was? It's a lovely day, isn't it, my lord? The ghost of a smile touched his face. Guess it is. He knew the remark hadn't come from his seamster, but Theralina. She was practically beaming beside him, the silly girl, all but gleaming with glee. Well, I suppose she's got a right to be happy. If she hadn't had one before, the fledgling maiden had undoubtedly cemented her place in their group. She'd done her part against Agheel, and while he still would have won the battle even without her aid, the boost she'd given him was not insubstantial. Even now he could feel himself brimming with power, strength left unspent during his fight. If this was the power of runes, why hadn't Melina unlocked his before? Theralina hadn't even reached all of them, yet he felt like he could wrestle a mountain and win. My lord? She was still staring at him now, as if he were her whole world. It may be presumptuous to ask, but... He knew what she craved and turned a smile on her. You did good back there. Real good. Her eyes lit up. I did, without a doubt. He nudged her shoulder as they weaved their way around a fallen tree. Couldn't ha' done that without you, truly, not a lie, really. He wouldn't be this strong without her. Had he broken his limits? Was it possible to go even further? The possibilities seemed endless. No, he chastised himself. Don't get too excited. It would all too easy to get drunk on a power like this. Best tread carefully. Unfortunately, Theralina mistook his silence for anger and squirmed under his gaze. I'll get better, I promise. So, a blink. Naruto didn't like the sudden pang of negativity he felt from her just then. So please, those bright eyes met his, don't throw me away. Throw away. His emotions slipped their leash. You need to stop that. He pivoted, grasping her by both shoulders so hard that she yelped. No more sulking. No more disparaging yourself. I'm not gonna get rid of you, not ever. Do you understand? I like helping people. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. I'm gonna do my damnedest and help everyone I come across. He began to count off on his fingers before he, further hammering his point home. Hyug, Blade, Alexander, Rogier, and the ever-surly Dwell, they were his friends, just like her. They might have their own goals, their own quests, but I still want to help them out, you know? That includes you. You get me? Theralina sniffled. Oh gods, he'd upset her, until she turned a shining smile on him and he realized he hadn't. Not at all. Her hands flitted out to hold his. I understand. Yes, I understand perfectly. The two fingers truly did guide me to you, my lord. No. My master. For you to quell the doubts in my heart with only a few words. Master, great, you've flipped her switch. Millicent made a displeased noise behind them. Are the two of you quite done? Look, lord. Boc's voice mercifully cut her off before the two could squabble. There's a cave ahead. Oh, thank the log for distractions. Naruto paused. Frowned. Squinted now. Sure enough, there was an opening carved into a nearby rock face. Shallow perhaps, but just wide enough for a reasonably sized person to fit through. He couldn't see what lay within, how deep it was, or anyone that might be taking shelter inside. Wait. He told a lie. There was something there. No, not something. Someone. An odd itch gnawed at the back of his brain and unbidden, he felt himself taking a step forward. Two now. He would have taken a third still if Theralina hadn't tugged him back. Greyroll balked. Must we go in there? Feels like we should. You might be a bit too big to fit in there, though. Greyroll made angry Greyroll noises. Naruto quirked a brow at her. It's just a cave. Nothing worry about. Who's worried? She tore her gaze aside, tail twitching behind her. Not I. A faint smile touched his lips. It was almost too good to be true. Don't tell me you're scared. Nonsense. The dragoness reared back, puffed out her chest. I am a dragon, not some hapless fool who fears the Daeorg. A wolf's howl echoed within, rendering her haughty response a string of gibberish as she sought shelter behind him. Well, she tried. One couldn't exactly hide when she was that damn tall. Naruto felt a grin tear across his face. He'd seen Greyroll grapple with gods, survive grievous wounds, and take the piss out of anyone who dared to cross her. In truth, he'd begun to think she feared nothing. How lovely it was, very lovely indeed, to be proven wrong. You're afraid of the dark, ain't ya? He grinned up at her. That's kind cute. Her eyes widened. Cute? I know not the meaning of this word. Do you mock me? Naruto told her in no uncertain terms. Grey blinked. She blinked hard. Reared back as if he'd struck her, eyes narrowed to vicious vermilion slits now as her pale face turned a startling shade of scarlet. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again, as she tried to find some semblance of speech, only to fail miserably. Did I say something wrong? Bah! She jerked back and spread her wings, nearly buffeting him in the process. Have your cave, then. I hope a rock falls on your skull. I shall scout ahead. An arm looped around Theralina, reeling the smaller girl in before she could get away. Come, little maiden. I would have words with thee. Theralina balked, realizing her peril. Now wait just a moment. Greyroll took wing and her words peaked into a shriek as they roared up into the clouds. Agheel rumbled softly, a deep throaty sound that might have been a laugh. I shall keep an eye on her. Sure. I mean, please do. Naruto watched him wing after her with a quizzical frown. Wonder what that was about. Millicent stepped to him. Will she be all right? Probably. Grey's tough. She hid a smile behind her hand. I was asking about Theralina. Oh. He frowned. Well, I'm sure they won't kill each other at the very least. Boc, silent until this very moment, coughed into a fist. Begging your pardon, lord, but I'm not one for caves either. I don't suppose we could let it be. A blonde brow rose. Wanna wait out here? The little demi-human squeaked in quiet fear. Alone? I'll be eaten alive. Well, he didn't have to be. Nothing a clone couldn't solve, but then again, he didn't want them wandering off again. Aha, here. He dug a hand into his pouch and came up with the bell Runny had given him so long ago. Use this to call a pack of wolves. They'll keep you safe. His seamster considered the trinket for a moment, looked like he wanted to protest, then firmed himself up. All right, then, lord. He gave him a curt nod, trying to be braver than he was. I'll wait for you here. Please hurry back. Don't worry, I will. On a whim, he bent to pat the little creature's head. Just holler if you need help, and I'll come running right back, okay? Millicent touched a hand to his arm. Worry not, I will accompany you. Appreciate it. She leaned against him and he luxuriated in her warmth, taking strength from her presence, before he turned to the last member of his party. Idly, he wondered if Melina would manifest herself. It was not to be. Although he could sense her presence nearby, she remained silent as ever. Her emotions muffled, thoughts hidden, she was in very way a silent specter, refusing to speak unless she wished. Another mountain to climb. Later, then. For now, they had a cave to explore. Alright, then. Let's see what's in there. Latenna could feel herself slipping away. As if she were clinging to a slippery slope with both hands, so too could she feel herself falling, sliding into the black. How long had she lay here? How long had she suffered? Poison in her veins, stemming from the foul arrow piercing her thigh. The toxins within were eating at her, she was not long for this world. Truly, it was a miracle she'd managed to make it through the cave at all, but here at last dear Lobo had collapsed, spilling her onto the cold, uncaring grass. Even now his great form shuddered with weaker and weaker breaths. If she was on death's doorstep, her dear wolf was crossing the threshold. She would die here, and her dear partner with her. It wasn't fair. She mustn't perish. No. Nay, not yet. There was still so much to do. She needed to go back, return to the village, avenge the others. Wait, that noise. She heard footsteps. Fear kicked against her chest. Another one of them, most likely, another brood in service to the all-knowing. See. She heard the voices soon thereafter. Told you there was an exit, here, oh. Millicent, watch the exit. I'll be right back. Latenna saw Boots enter her field of vision and feared a kick. It never came. They just stood there. She scowled where she lay, still scarcely able to move. Who goes there? Have you come to kill me? Her wolf growled. Even on death's door, Lobo shifted his great bulk to defend her. And yet her tormentor did not speak. Foul tarnished. The very words boiled in her blood much like the toxin slowly killing her. What do you want? I told the all-hearing brute that I do not possess the medallion he seeks. It still lay with old Albus, a secret she would take to her grave. My answers to his questions remain the same. I will divulge nothing more. What questions? Her lips thinned in a taut, angry line. Would that her legs weren't so weak, would that she could stand and fight, would that she could flee. Alas, she lacked the strength to do anything more than scowl. Have you come to take more from me, tarnished? More than the all-hearing brood already took? A faint shudder passed through Lobo's body behind her and she fought down a sob. Was my other half not enough? Leave me be. The voice didn't waver. I'm not going to hurt you. A hand reached for her. In a fit of pique, Latenna slapped it away. Not going to hurt her? Lies. Lurid and false, just like the rest. They'd welcomed Gideon's men in good faith, fallen for his silver tongue, even held a feast to honor the protection that all-hearing brood had promised them. And then that monster had brought the slayers, the omen killers, the butchers. Her family had been slaughtered. He mother her brothers, and her sisters, even the little ones. Easy, there. The newcomer dropped down to his haunches and knelt before her. You've lost an awful lot of blood, you know. Rage gave her the strength to raise her head. I said leave me. Words caught in her throat, strangling a curse. His hair shone like the sun and his body more so, all burning, glowing gold, etched with black marks. Stranger still, his eyes were of pure amber, slitted like those of a cat with another line running lengthwise through them. They were, perhaps, the most unnatural eyes she'd ever lay pardon the pun. What was he? Man? Monster? Something between. I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner, he said. Relax. I'm here. It's going to be all right now. For all his fearsome appearance, he smiled at her. Reached past now, laid hands not on Latenna herself, but upon her wolf. Light suffused his palms, a gentle guiding glow. Lobo shook beneath it, less a gasp and more of a tremor. Wounds mended at his touch. A missing leg regrew. His once labored breaths began to even out. She heard his heartbeat grow stronger with each passing moment, until... Good boy. The light faded as the stranger leaned back. See? Friendly Bleck. He yelped as Lobo sprang to his feet. Watch the tongue. Not the face. Down. Down. Latenna balked. Her other half hadn't been long for this world. Yet here he was, spry as a pup, and twice as enthusiastic. The Golden Man, she couldn't think of anything else to call him, fended off his enthusiasm with one hand, bracing himself on the ground with another as he laughed. What are you? Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a merry smile. Someone who wants to help, you know. Her brow furrowed. Your name? Naruto. He gave it gladly. A most curious name indeed. Latenna looked at him again, then truly looked at him as she hadn't before. Drank every inch of him in. Her gaze alighted upon his chest and right arm, noting the markings there. Each glowered with eerie light, one gold, the other red. He seemed stronger for it, somehow. Sharper in her mind's eye. And why wouldn't he be? He'd slain 2 shard-bearers. Latenna had never seen the like before, but she knew the make of a great rune. Everyone did. Which meant this tarnished, he just might be. 2 great runes, as I live and breathe. Awe escaped her with a whisper. It would seem I've underestimated you. And you. His smile faded as he noticed the black arrow still jutting from her thigh. Here, let me see your leg. Said smile stilled as he lifted her thigh. That's in there pretty deep. Her eyes bulged. He wouldn't dare. See. He drawled the first word to calm her and fished a clean ran from his pouch. Here. Bite down on this. Might hurt a little. Look, I can't heal ya if that thing's still in there. His voice was warm as honey, yet not patronizing. Is it poisoned? That seems to be a thing around these parts. Latenna glared bloody red daggers at him, but nodded all the same. Had he been anyone else, she would have told him what he could do with that rag, that he could bug her right off. But he'd healed her dear friend, helped her other half. Besides, Lobo did seem to like him. Her mount nosed her hand, urging her on. Lobo had ever been a good judge of character. He'd been wary of the all-hearing brute and his men from the first, even when she'd blindly trusted them. Surely if he believed in this one. With a sigh, she took the cloth from the Golden Man and bit into it. Right, then. The man's head went down, brow furrowing. On 3. 1. 2. Pain. Her world went red when the bastard pulled early, her body bucked as she screamed into the cloth. Strong hands came down on her shoulders, in a moment of weakness she allowed herself to curl up against them. But only for a moment. Because now those hands were moving past her, coming to rest on the wound of her ruined leg. She was in far too much pain to protest. Easy fix, don't you worry. She heard him mutter over the ringing in her ears. I've healed worse than this. You'll be right as rain in no time. Just breathe. With those words a strange warmth pervaded her being, like tiny sunbeams sliding under her skin. Before her eyes the blackened veins fled from her flesh like so much mist before the sun. In no time at all, the wound was all but closed. She ran a hand over it, marveling at the unmarked skin. How? He didn't stop there. Not done yet. Seems like there's something wrong with your legs. Shame darkened her features. We Albinorics have weak legs. She hastened to explain. Once we reach adolescence, we are unable to walk. That is why I have Lobo. Latenna tried to speak further, only for a fresh convulsion to rack her body from head to toe. Little bolts of lightning raced through her veins, shattering her tenuous self-control. She thrashed backward. A hand caught her by the head and lowered her gingerly to the ground. She felt something pop in her back, then her hips, followed now by her femur and tibia. Last of all came her ankles, little motes of golden light dancing over her feet. Made her think of butterflies, it did. Now if only they didn't feel so strange. Lobo plunked down beside her and nosed at her shoulder. Worry not, she managed to touch his snout with a trembling hand. I feel fine. Oh. A startled cry fled from her lips as another jolt seized her body. Very fine indeed, if she was being honest. This felt good. Very good. Perfectly pleasant, really. Almost like something she would rather not speak of. Her beloved partner whined once and curled around her. Latenna wasn't sure how much time passed after that. Seconds? Minutes? Or perhaps an hour. At last, her unusual ally took his hands away, wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, and sat down beside her. The unusual golden glow fled from his body. She looked on curiously as those smoldering red eyes lashed their cross-shaped pupils and receded into gentle, shimmering blue. Oh, dear. Now that he wasn't shining like the sun, he actually looked rather so. Their owner asked of her, how do you feel? Latenna's mind fizzled. Bwah. Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a surprisingly boyish grin. Not the answer I expected, but given you haven't tried to skewer me yet, I'll take that as a good sign. Ahem. She coughed into a fist, flushing fiercely. I feel better. My thanks you have, for your timely aid. Don't worry about it. He climbed to his feet. Here, stand up. She frowned at his words. You know that I cannot. You can now. His hand didn't waver. What did she have to lose? Her hand clasped his wrist, if only to prove a point. She whistled to Lobo first, however. Her other half moved in, ready to catch her if, when, she inevitably fell. But she didn't fall. It took her several seconds to realize it. She was standing, her hand in his, one of his arms looped around her waist to hold her steady as she looked up at him. At any other time Latenna might have flushed. Such thoughts were far from her mind. Because she could stand. Her legs trembled, yes, but not from weakness. She simply hadn't used them in some time. See? He grinned. Told ya. She drew back a little, wriggling out his arm while still holding to his hand. Lobo nudged up behind her for support and she unconsciously leaned against her beloved Lupin friend. Did this man enjoy shattering her worldview so? Whenever she thought something was impossible, he blazed right past it. Or through it. First her dear Lobo, then her wound, now her legs. Madness. Utter madness. Still, it was a good madness. She could get used to this. No, no, no. Focus. She had a mission to complete. Let's try again, shall we? Mustering the tattered threads of her dignity, she sat up. I am Latenna. An albinoric, as you can see. Her head bowed a little when he nodded in return. My apologies for my coarse words, earlier. I presumed the worst, seeing that you were a tarnished, and whatnot, much like that brute. Please, forgive me. For a moment it looked like he might protest the title of tarnished, but with a sigh, he shrugged. Nothing to forgive. I'm just glad you're alright. Alright? She was more than alright. He'd given her legs again. Still, if he was willing to go so far for her once, perhaps he might yet again. Sod it. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, as the saying went. If it pleases you, tarnished, would you consider doing me another service? Sure. His face hid no lie. If it's more arrows you're after, I know a guy. Hyug can fix you right up. More ammunition. But he was certainly going out of his way to tempt her to his side. And succeeding. Well, then. Heat speared the back of her neck even as her face flushed with color. Bold, this one. Perhaps later. She said instead. First, I must go back. To my village. There is something that I must retrieve there, even it pains me. Will you help me avenge my people, good tarnished? She wasn't willing to telling him about the land of Miquella's Haligtree. Not yet. Should he pass this last test, well. She'd consider. If you accept, I would gladly appraise you of the whereabouts of the medallion's other half. And where does this medallion lead? She met his gaze stoically, refusing to flinch. I shall tell you when we have both halves. He nodded once. Fair enough. Thank you kindly. Yes. Victory was hers. They say the other half of the medallion is beyond the Forbidden Lands, north of the Erd Tree. She turned and pointed toward a distant peak, smiling a little when his gaze soon followed hers. You'll find it in Castle Sol beyond the capital, nestled within the mountaintops of the giants, accessible by the grand lift of Rold. Seems a bit of a walk, but sure. Again, he yielded to her request all too easily. I'll be headed that way eventually. Bert, first tell me more about what happened to your village. Latenna did just that, sparing no grisly detail. She told her tale, a story of a people who wished only to be left in peace and the treacherous Tarnished that had come to them. Deceived them. Slaughtered them, when they would not give him what he wanted. As she told her tale, she watched Naruto's face darken. By the time she finished, he looked fit to spit sparks. His eyes flickered red, then back to blue, red again, before finally centering on stormy cerulean once more. The man who did this, he paused, swallowed, then mastered his emotions before speaking. You never told me his name, hadn't she? No matter, easily remedied. Gideon. Latenna turned her head and spat. He calls himself Sir Gideon Offner. Even claims to be all-knowing, brute that he is. His eyes flashed with recognition. Ah! The noise Naruto made, the way he reacted to her words, was more akin to a growl than a sigh, an alpha predator taking a deep breath before pouncing upon its prey. Something in it warmed her blood. She imagined him wringing that all-hearing's brute neck. The thought brought her a small bit of pleasure. Yes, she rather liked the idea of someone choking the life out of that brute, after she'd stuck a few arrows in him, of course. Once she tracked him down, there would be a reckoning. So she swore. And then her savior surprised her once more. If it's that bastard, then I think I'll have a few words with him. Latenna perked up. You know where he hides? I do. He admitted it freely. If this is true. She squeezed his hands. It is. Then I'll personally help you kick his ass once we're done with Liurnia. 'S not right, what he did. He shook his head. If he really did that to your village, he'll pay for it. I promise. Her eyes met his, half-lidded in challenge. Do you swear? He lifted his chin. I don't go back on my word. Silence stretched between them, human and albinoric alike. Neither budged, until one of them finally did. Latenna found herself looking away first. Is that so? If this man, he who looked upon the albinorics so kindly, were to become Elden Lord, there just might be a future for her people. Would that all Tarnished were like you? He really was, but she could feel herself smiling in spite of her worries nonetheless. What say you, Lobo? She turned to her loyal companion, ever at her side. My faithful wolf, my better half. Shall we go with the Tarnished now, so that our journey will not have been in vain? Lobo gave her a pointed look and barked once in affirmation. It was as good an answer as any. On her new legs, Latenna sketched a clumsy bow. Very well. We will fight by your side. First she must go back to the village and check upon old Albus. Perhaps he yet lived. The old mage had ever been good at hiding himself when it suited him. Unbidden, her mind recalled happier times, times when she was but a child, a little girl, with no cares in the world. He always won their games of hide and seek. But there would be no more games now. No more laughter. Only sadness and sorrow. She stifled a pang of pain at the memory. If he was dead, she would avenge him. Yes, she would avenge them all. Revenge? Yes. She would start with revenge. Great. He tugged her hands, inadvertently pulling her closer. Really, it's a good thing I found you and not one of my clones. They can't heal like I do, and things might not have turned out so well. Latenna blinked, drawn from her musings. Clone? What, pray tell, is that? Well, he laughed, I've got a few boys wandering around, you'll probably meet them sooner or later. Castle Morn was a madhouse. Naruto's clone crept into the courtyard, swearing softly as he went. So many bodies. Just looking at it made him feel ill. Piles upon piles of corpses stacked upon another, cooked and burned, while the misbegotten howled their victory. He almost envied Irena her blindness. She'd never have to see this. But he had. He'd never forget it. Neither would the boss, once he dispelled himself. The sight was already seared into his soul, it made his very blood boil. He had to look away from it all, just to keep himself from flying into a blind rage. "You all right back there?" "I am, sir." He frowned. "Told you not to call me that." Irena dared a tentative nod, turning her sightless eyes in his direction. He couldn't see the entirety of her face thanks to the blindfold, but her lips were pursed into a thin white line. Poor girl. She couldn't see anything, but she could hear those monsters howling. Even she knew better than to speak above a whisper here. Doing so would just draw them down onto her. He'd not let that happen. Even if it cost him this meager life of his. He dared to pat her head. "Remember, stay put." He gave her a nudge. "If you hear footsteps come your way, you take the lift back down. Even if they come after you, the fall should kill them." She nodded once. "And what of you?" He chose an easy answer. "Gonna kill them." Irena balked, bless her sweet soul. "All of them? By yourself?" "Yup," his piece said. He marched to meet death. The original could heal Irena. Give her back her eyes. Be there for all the important stuff. The messy bits fell to him, and he was fine with that. Really, he was. He was just a clone after all. Really, it was a miracle he'd survived this long with what little chakra he had left. He had no way to reliably supply himself with more, he was running on fumes as it was. Best to go out with a bang and all, you know. The boss would get all his memories and emotions once he died anyway. He tilted his head back with a sigh. What a lovely day. The plan was simple. Clear out the enemies, take the little miss to her old man, get them to the round table, then wipe out the rest if he still had the chakra for it. He liked simple. Simple was as simple does. Just like him. Easier that way. He'd never been one for complex plans outside of combat. Oi! He raised his voice. Over here. An angry misbegotten lunged at him. His fist scythed out, bisecting the cruel creature like wheat from so much chaff. Much to his surprise, it dropped in a single hit. Seriously? He considered his bloody fist with a frown. You're that weak? Huh. Maybe this'll be easier than I thought, then. He patted his cheeks gently, careful not to dispel himself, doing so would leave Irena a sitting duck. I can do this. Worry not. The rune on his finger sang, startling him. I shall see thee sustained until thy deed is done, until the girl is safe. The clone grinned. Thanks, think not of it. Now kill these beasts. Rip and tear, happily. For once, he actually agreed with the disembodied voice. Whoever she was, at least she had good taste. He unslung Godric's axe from his back and bellowed a war cry. All eyes turned toward him. The rest rushed him, just as planned. Too slow. His arm was already winding up, hoisting the weapon high. Now how had that old fart done it again? Something along the lines of, ha! Shifting his grip on the haft he whirled and brought it crashing down. It struck with impossible force, splitting the earth. Once. Twice. Thrice. Bodies flew through the air. He caught one by the tail as it sailed past and whipped it into another, rendering them both bloody stains on the wall. An startled wail went up from the others, but he didn't give them the chance to regret their actions. A quick leap and he was among them, repeating the process again. No mercy for you bastards. They couldn't touch him. Nothing could. Just as well, too, because he couldn't bring himself to stop. His blood was well and truly up now, consequences be damned. His armor proved a boon in that regard, allowing him to conserve what little chakra he had left and wade in, tank hits that, as a clone, he might have otherwise avoided. Misbegotten, mad dogs, an odd creature with a metal head, none came close, and likewise, none of them were spared. These were crazed beasts, not people. Not like the boss, or even good Ol Hyuk. He showed them no mercy. Rip and tear until it is done. Such senseless slaughter. Nepheli couldn't bear the sight of it. Just looking upon the piled corpses made her sick. This village had not been slain. Slaying implied at least some small semblance of dignity, that the opposing party might have died with honor. But there was no honor here, was there? These harmless albinorics had been slaughtered nearly to a man. What wretches remained, poor creatures dragging themselves across the ground, could barely be called sane. She'd seen such a slaughter before, back in the Badlands. It brought back unpleasant memories of her childhood. And all this, for what? What possible purpose could compel such madness? She didn't know. No, she didn't want to know, lest the same insanity take her as it had whoever had committed this heinous crime. These people had no weapons. No means of defending themselves. They were civilians, for God's sake. They'd clearly tried to run, crawl away before someone had set them ablaze. Fury frothed in her heart. Who would do such a thing? There. Footsteps to her right, coming up the rise. Had the oppressors returned? She reached for her axes with a snarl. If they were still here, whoever had done this, she would cut them apart. Nepheli? A familiar voice crowed, bringing her up short. I thought that was you. Her eyes widened. Naruto? Why are you here? Against all odds, it really was him. He wasn't alone, of course, nor did Nepheli expect him to be. New companions with him this time, a one-armed redhead she didn't recognize and, oh dear. That was most assuredly an albinoric beside him, sitting astride a great direwolf. There was another smaller creature riding behind her, but she barely noticed the little demi-human. Because the woman's pale face was writ with fury, eyes blazing with wrath. She looked all of an instant from drawing her bow. No, there it was. Warrior. She all but bit out the word. Speak thy name and intent or die where you stand. Nothing to be had for it then. I am Nepheli Lu. And you are? It was the wrong thing to say, because the woman's fury became downright apoplectic and the wolf snarled at her. Weapons came out. In an instant Nepheli found a bow knocked and drawn to her throat. Whoa, whoa. Naruto flung up his arms, anxious to prevent hostilities. No need for that, Latenna. She's a friend. I've fought with her before. She serves the all-knowing. The words made her flinch. This is his doing. We must kill her at once. What? Nepheli sprang to her feet. I knew not of this. My father would never. Latenna's bowstring drew tighter still. Lies. Hey, hey. Naruto thrust himself between them. Let's just calm down. An arrow speared into his neck. A voice cried out. Light flashed and the deadly shaft ricocheted back the way it came, drawing a flinch from all parties present. Nepheli most of all. Blinking the spots from her vision, she found her situation reversed, for now it was the albinoric woman her wolf pinned. Much to her surprise, Naruto wasn't the responsible party. His one-armed redhead had one boot on the beast's throat and sword to the albinoric's neck, bright golden eyes burning with a rage all her own. One should not underestimate a cripple, Nepheli knew. This woman was deadly. If you ever, Millicent rasped, harm my lord in such a manner again, I will end you. Her scowl deepened when the archer tried to struggle. Perhaps I should do so now. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose and exhaled in a long-suffering sigh. Mealy, let her go. But by Lord. She rounded on him, made incredulous by the nickname as much as his declaration. She shot you. No buts. I'm sure she didn't mean to, right, Latenna? Indeed. The albinoric didn't dare nod, not with a blade to her neck, but she spoke quickly all the same, almost as if she feared this man as much as respected him. Nepheli made note of it. That was not my intent. She was my target. You put yourself in harm's way. Her wolf whimpered beneath her. Please, forgive me my indiscretion. The little demi-human still sitting on the wolf's back dared to pipe up. Can't we all just get along? Quiet, BOC. Millicent, Naruto tooted. Be nice. Millicent looked like she'd rather take Latenna's head, but subsided under a withering look. There we go. We're all on the same side here. Naruto stepped between them without missing a beat. I'm sure we all want to find who's responsible for this mess, eh? Seeing her chance for redemption, Nepheli stepped up beside him. That was my intent to begin with. You needn't tell me twice. Latenna eyed her balefully. And if she betrays us? Naruto shook his head. She won't, but if she does? His eyes slid to her. Nepheli shivered. Then I'll deal with her myself. You have my word. He would, she knew. Something had hardened in him, awoken him to the cruelty of the world. A tan hand touched her and forced her bow down. Been a while, hasn't it? His voice had an edge to it that warmed her blood. That it has. Her smile soured when she looked back to the bodies heaped at their feet. What do you make of it, then? What's happened to this village? Nothing good, putting it mildly, that. She turned her gaze up the hill where still more bodies could be seen. I witnessed a sight much the same, in my infancy. Her lips thinned at the memory. The oppression of the weak. Murder and pillage unchecked. A waking nightmare made by men. Even now the reminder stung, her finger ground into fists at her sides. But this time I am a woman grown. And though the suffering cannot be undone, I can still mete out justice to the oppressors. She tore her axes free. Let the scars I carve remind them. I am Nepheli Lu. Warrior. Naruto nodded and clapped her shoulder. That you are. Now let's do this. Up they went, expecting great resistance. What few souls they encountered were gibbering idiots, mindless albinorics broken by pain and torture. These at least, they put out of their misery with decisive blows, but of the invaders there was no sign. They finally found it in the form of depraved perfumer, a mad lunatic spewing a cloud of flame at them. Latenna's drilled it through both eyes before Nepheli could hope to reach it. The creature fell with nary a sound. No one else dared to challenge them. Wait. Naruto cocked his head to one side, listening to a voice only he could hear. There's something here. Before she could think to have him elaborate, the whiskered warrior turned and walked back the way they'd come, trotting over the perfumer's corpse. Nepheli followed, frowning now when the bemused blonde reached a heavy-looking pot. He leaned over it, considering it with a keen eye. His fist swung up and came crashing down. A startled yelp answered him halfway, and quite suddenly there wasn't a pot there at all, but a person. With a shimmer of light an illusion fell away to reveal a hunched old man, an old albinoric clutching both hands to his chest. His head bowed, all but scraping the floor in fear. Ah! Please, no! Dear me, haven't a clue. Words flowed forth from him in a terrified wheeze. No secrets lie with me, not a one. Leave me be. The younger albinoric nudged her mount forward. Albus, Latenna. But who is this with you? Wait, then, you're not one of them? Well, what a relief. A rasping cough shook his frail form. Oh, goodness me. I am Albus. An albinoric, as you can see. We're finished. The whole village is finished. The cursemongers have destroyed everything. No one that remains has their wits about them. Nepheli drew back, feeling an intruder here in this moment, a witness to something terribly personal indeed. But she couldn't bring herself to plug her ears. She might not catch Naruto and Latenna's whispers, but she heard the old man's words. She heard them all. I beg you, the dying man held up a strange half-disc for Naruto and Latenna to see. Would you look after this medallion? You must keep it out of the cursemonger's hands. I fear I am not long for this world myself. Ack! Cack! Another rattling cough shook his wiry frame. A chosen land awaits us albinorics. The medallion is the key that leads to the city. It's only a quaint treasure, for we who cannot make the journey. No, no, Latenna. Do not speak. You do this old man proud. Fulfill your purpose. My legs will soon fade, and with them, my life. Alas, this is the immovable fate of all albinorics. I'm so glad you escaped it. Latenna came back, tears in her eyes, clutching half a medallion to her chest. No words were needed. Across the bridge they went, dispatching the mad souls in their path. Nepheli could feel Millicent's steely gaze blazing into her back the whole way, until they saw it. A great bonfire burned beneath a twisted tree, piled high with fresh corpses. Dozens of bodies, men, women, children, all heaped atop one another. Fuel for the fire. There was something here. Something else. She saw it at last, a masked figure standing before a raging flame. Omen killer. This was no mere human. 'Twas a beast in the shape of a man, an emotionless husk that lived for but one purpose. To kill and kill and kill, to slaughter all those who might stand in the way of the Golden Order. Omens, for one, were their favorite prey. But there were no omens here, were there? Someone must have lured it here. And she knew whom. Latenna hollered in heartbreak. Fiend! The abomination turned to face them and brandished its twisted cleavers with a roar. Naruto didn't roar back. Far from it. He started swearing. She heard naught but 3 words within. Rotten piece of. The omen killer bounded forward. Naruto reached up to his back and drew 2 paired black greatswords. Wait. Black greatswords? Were those? To call what followed a fight would have been generous. Nepheli didn't just see them collide, she heard it, felt it rattle her very teeth. The impact rooted her where she stood. A glowing hail of arrows skewered the omen killer's right knee, causing it to buckle. Naruto stepped in and smashed a boot into its chest, flinging it back. The mad creature went berserk, laying about with its wretched cleavers, flaying the very ground around it, only to be summarily rebuffed as those twin black blades came crashing down. An arm flew through the air. Millicent flowed up, over, around, then down, and quite suddenly omen killer found its face smashed into the ground. Latenna's bow sang and a hail of arrows sprouted from the beast's chest. Naruto raced in on its heels, drawing its attention with a wary cry. A twisted cleaver slammed into his shoulder. Naruto looked down at it. Up at the omen killer. Down again. I'm sorry, he frowned, was that supposed to do something? Clenched knuckles roared up at speed. His attacker rocketed into the air, struck a twisted tree, and slumped down atop a pile of corpses. Anyone else would have died from the impact. And yet this fiend struggled upright, bones twisted, body mangled, seeking its next victim. Nepheli didn't give it that chance. Even as it staggered upright, she stepped in and slashed down with her axes. The omen killer took the wound without so much as a word. Less so when Millicent appeared beside her and drove her shamshir blade through the beast's ribs. Caught unawares, the emotionless monstrosity staggered, which in turn gave Naruto time to reach them. Radon's greatswords sang a mournful dirge in his hands and carved into the towering abomination, driving it down on a ruined knee. It was a foregone conclusion after that. The 3 of them ripped and tore, slashed and hewed, fought as they were meant to. It was over in a matter of moments. Naruto stood tall over the cruel creature's corpse, his eyes were wild, chest heaving from adrenaline. Their eyes met and Nepheli felt something stir in her. Her blood quickened, singing in her veins. She took a step forward. Latenna beat her to it, all but leaping off her wolf and into his arms. Naruto caught her with a grunt. She flung herself against him, not to embrace him, but to cry, burying her head in his chest. Any desire Nepheli might have felt cooled in that moment, tamped down to fading embers. It's over. The poor Albinaruic murmured into his shoulder. It's finally over. They've been avenged. Well, now didn't she feel the fool? No matter. So the Albinoric warrior was keen on him, was she? Well, she was a warrior herself, daughter to Hoera Lu. She wouldn't give up that easily. A warrior fought for what they wanted, no matter the obstacles they might encounter, no matter the competition they might face. She would stand by him, even if she had not yet earned that right. No. Not yet, she hadn't. But she was determined to try. Irena loathed her blindness. Her lack of vision had ever been a constant companion to her since she was a child, an accursed inescapable handicap that hounded her every step. She could no sooner escape from it than she could cease to breathe. It was a part of her, no matter how much she despised it. Had her father not been who he was, she suspected she would have been cast out long ago. Yet here, in this moment, she almost considered it a blessing. She'd heard such awful sounds. Ripping and tearing. The screaming of monsters, the clashing of steel. What an awful sight it must have been. It had gone on forever, an endless cacophony of the dying and the damned, and she had no doubts as to who was responsible for it all. It should have frightened her. But it didn't. Strange as it might sound, their screams comforted her. Sir Naruto must be a most powerful knight indeed, even if he claimed not to be one. Who else but a knight could be so brave? Surely he deserved a reward. No, the world had gone silent. Somehow, that was worse. So much worse. None of those awful misbegotten had come her way. Not once. But she couldn't hear anything now. Even the dogs were dead. He must have wiped out the courtyard, then gone up to the parapets to cleanse the rest of the castle. He must have. Surely he was still alive. He wouldn't leave her. Not after all this. Surely. Hello. She dared to call out into the silence. Good sir, are you there? A hand patted her shoulder. Irena nearly jumped out of her skin. It's safe. His voice was lower, more weary, but still strong. Come on. Strong fingers took her by the hand. Let's go find your old man. Hand-holding. How forward. And yet, Irena found herself squeezing his palm tightly, clinging on for dear life. Well. That settled it, then. He was her knight. She would sooner die than desert him. They reached the academy in silence. It was there that Naruto received a most unpleasant bit of news. Wait. So what you're tellin' me is, he cracked his neck and gazed up at the academy proper. This Renalla lady, she's a prisoner in her own home. She's also quite mad, or so the stories go, Millicent chimed, but yes, as much a prisoner to that as I am to the rot. It was the wrong thing to say, yet also the right. He pivoted in place and opened his senses. Sure enough, he felt it. Something powerful. Sad. Heartbroken. But mad? He'd seen madness. Even experienced it a time or two himself. This didn't feel like madness. No, if anything it felt an awful lot like, well. Now that was strange. Very strange indeed. His eyes narrowed. I'll be right back. Should we not wait for Greyroll and Theralina to return? They've been gone an awful long while. Nah. I just need a minute. Nepheli frowned. Wait, what do you mean Amithi? Her worlds trailed off behind him as he gathered his legs, tensed up, and leaped right at the main spire. He crossed both arms before his face and smashed through. Kept smashing, as gravity dragged him down one level, then the next, sending him hurtling through another now, yet another and another still. Mad, was she? Well, they'd just see about that. Naruto knew a thing or two about madness himself. Renalla was not mad. Madness implied a lack of sanity, that she was no longer capable of rational thought. Many might think her such, indeed, perhaps to them, she was. The world believed her to be a broken woman past her prime and out of her mind. Beyond her ken, unable to cope with heartbreak and the tragedy that had befallen her family in the wake of the shattering. 'Twas not true, of course. She was quite sane. She had simply ceased to care about the outside world, just as it had ceased to care about her. Why should she care, for that matter? What did it matter who fought or ruled past these walls? Most had betrayed her, and those who hadn't were even now suffering fates worse than death. They were, all of them, forsaken. Such was their lot in life. So would it remain until the sun ceased to burn in the sky, and so too would she remain here in isolation with her sweetings until the day she died. Geronimo. Thus it came as something of a surprise, yes, a very great surprise indeed, when the ceiling ruptured overhead and a golden meteor came hurtling through. He crashed through. For a wild moment she thought he was going to crash into her, but no, he changed course in midair and landed in a pointed crouch, one hand flung forward in a fist to catch himself. Her precious sweetings tumbled backward, stunned, but unharmed. Ha! She heard him chuckle as he stood. Always wanted to try a superhero landing, you know. It really is hell on the knees. From there he straightened, took a good long look at her and, kept staring. Desolate though she was, Renalla was still queen of the full moon. She had her dignity if nothing else. If he didn't stop at this instant she would sick her sweetings on him. Geez, you're a real tall lady, ain't-cha? You'd make Greyroll look small. Renalla frowned. She frowned hard. Oops. He balked after a moment, only to surprise her by bowing at the waist. Sorry about your ceiling. I was kinda in a hurry. Who was this bold blonde braggart barging into her home? Clearly he did not seek rebirth. Yet though he was armed and armored for battle, he made no move to attack her, nor to draw his weapons and, oh dear. She saw his swords then, truly saw the black blades nestled against his back, as she hadn't before. Smaller perhaps, but she recognized the make of them all the same. Her heart hitched against her chest, kicking painfully between her breasts. It could not be. It should not be. It must not be, yet it was. Radon. The young man flinched. How do you know that name? His swords. She barely choked the words out. How do you have those weapons? Speak. Renalla leaned forward, looming large over him. Where did ye find those blades? Didst thou grant my son his rest? Speak true, or I shall smite ye where you stand. The man in dragon armor was silent for a moment, his face twisted in momentary anguish. Not of her. He did not fear her. No, she knew he was recalling a more recent pain. Did it involve her son? What had he done to him? His stoicism did little to soothe her already ragged nerves. Why wouldn't he speak? At length he did. You're his mother, aren't you? I'm so sorry. A lone tear rolled down her cheek. I tried to save him. Really, I did. The blonde hastened to explain, face darkening with shame. But he wouldn't let me. So, yeah. He looked away, scratching at the back of his head. I gave him pace. He seemed to see something past her, whatever it was, it made him shiver and swing his gaze back to her. I'll leave the swords here with you, but if it's a fight you won't get it, I can tell. Again he looked away, unable to meet her gaze over long. Please. Don't make me fight you. Another tear rolled from her left eye, touched her cheek, ran down her chin. Radon, her baby boy. Wait. What was the tarnish doing now? You seem so sad. Renalla blinked as the baffling blonde sat down before her and patted the space beside him. Wanna talk about it? She found herself complying. Physically, at least. No. The blonde boy blinked, no doubt taken aback by the sudden change in her demeanor. To the talking, or the fight? Neither. She was filled with sorrow, yes, but beneath it lurked relief, for now she knew at least one of her children was finally free from suffering. There was a part of her that believed little Runni was still out there, in the world somewhere. Perhaps she suffered even now. Maybe thinking such was a madness of its own. Radon, thankfully, was at peace. She could take some semblance of solace in that. She prayed that he had died as a man rather than a monster, because one such monster still lived. I thank thee for thy service, noble tarnished. Her gaze traveled to his right arm, where Sun's great rune still burned even now. A thought occurred to her. Little more than an arrow in the dark, but still, it spurred her to speak. Do you seek the great rune so that ye might become Elden Lord? His face turned a curious shade of red. It's complicated. Such a kind boy. To rebirth him would be truly a waste. And she was so very lonely. I will gladly grant thee mine rune of rebirth, she offered her egg to him, if he would but grant me a boon. Anything. She turned stern eyes on him. Moment of truth. Please, slay my second son as you slew Radon. Silence stretched between them. His jaw clicked open. Closed. Opened again. Tall lady, say what now? I would have you do as you have already done before. So be it. No going back now, she was set on this course. His name is Rykard. He dwells in the Volcano Manor. Once he was a man, but now, the words lodged in her throat for a moment, and she faltered, he has become a terrible beast. You will know him when you see him. Swear that you will see this done, and I shall swear both myself and my rune to thee. His eyes widened, perhaps misunderstanding her meaning. You're serious about this? This is your kid you're talking about. 'Twould be a mercy. Do you accept my terms? He looked away. Scratched his chin. Sighed, now. Guess I do. So how does this work? I've never had someone give me a great rune before. She hummed a little. Be still. He did not flinch as she took the rune from the egg. Nor did he speak when branded it against the side of his throat. Not once did he cry out. It was a fitting trade, she felt. This way, he would have the last say in any who might yet be reborn properly. Provided they brought a larval tear to her, of course, but she was getting ahead of herself. Her eyes swept back to him now, watching intently as he massaged his neck. Ow! He grunted, touching a hand to the silver marking. Stings a little, but I'll manage. His eyes met hers then, riveting her. You're coming with me, right? Despite her best efforts to remain calm, Renalla felt heat creep up the back of her neck. I beg your pardon, with me. He repeated, holding out a hand. You want closure, right? I'll be happy to help ya. Unbidden, her fingers twitched towards his. Hesitated, now, when he didn't waver in the face of her confusion. You truly accompany me? For so little. His smile was sunshine itself. What can I say? I like helping. It's what I do, you know. Come on. He wiggled his arm at her. Take my hand. Everything's gonna be alright. Renalla reached the rest of the way and claimed his hand with hers. Oddly enough, she believed him. Such a strange tarnished. And his fingers were so very warm. That's it for part 4. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.